So that's the early stages of fasting. Now, in the later stages of fasting, something changes, and the body is starting to say we need to conserve what we've got left in terms of the protein. So it reduces the rate of protein metabolism just to preserve, what you've got left in your muscles, your heart, etc. And and the other tissues in your body reduce the rate at which they metabolize ketone bodies, which is derived from lipids, like I talked about earlier. And instead, they start to metabolize the fatty acids, which are derived from lipids as well. So lipids can be used to generate fatty acids and ketones. And also glycerol, which, as I said earlier, can be used to make glucose. But this isn't a massive metabolic pathway. So your tissues reduce the rate at which they use ketone bodies and increase the rate at which they use fatty acids, which results in the amount of ketones in your blood. So this is just shorthand for concentration in your blood. The amount of ketones in your blood goes up. And this is important because when the amount of glucose in your blood is down, your brain needs something to metabolize with, and this is where it derives its energy from. So by the rest of your body reducing the rate at which they metabolize these, it frees up quite a lot of it to let your brain keep running and keeping you alive, essentially. So that's essentially what happens in the stages of fasting. Now, when you go on to refeeding, things change because you're finally getting food. But if you eat too much too quickly, this is where problems arise. So, when you eat, as I said earlier, the amount of insulin in your blood goes up. So what does that do? Well, like I said earlier, 1, increases glucose metabolism. 2, increase glucose storage as glycogen. 3, increase lipid formation. 4, increase protein synthesis. So, whereas in the fasting state you were in something called a catabolic state, i.e. the breakdown of bigger molecules to smaller ones, which is your protein and your lipids to like ketone bodies and amino acids to generate energy, you're now going to an anabolic state like you were in the fed state. And this is something that requires a number of molecules, and the most important ones are phosphates, which I'll denote to as P in a circle. You also need magnesium. Okay? So, where do you get the phosphate from? Well, there is some phosphate in your blood, and that is as phosphoric acid. And so your cells start to absorb all of that phosphate after they've used all of their intracellular stores to generate these big molecules. And they also manage to get phosphate from molecules like ATP, which is essentially the energy currency of your cells. And the other thing is that red blood cells contain something called 2,3-DPG, which the P is the phosphate, and they can convert 2,3-DPG to a single phosphate-containing molecule, and again, that's where the phosphate can be derived from. And what does that do? Well, that reduces the amount of phosphate that's in your blood. And it also causes the oxygen curve for your red blood cells to go left-hand. and that essentially impairs, let me get this right, it impairs oxygen delivery to your tissues. And so the amount of phosphate in your blood goes down, the amount of and the amount of 2,3-DPG goes down. Okay? Now, the other thing that insulin has an effect on is it causes the amount of potassium in your blood to go down, and this is through a direct action on a protein that's sitting on the on your cells. And so this causes the amount of potassium in your blood to go down. And potassium and magnesium are linked. So when the amount of potassium in your blood goes down, so does the amount of magnesium. So what does this lead to? Well, this leads to something called hypophosphatemia, hypo meaning low, phosphate meaning phosphate, and emia meaning blood, so low phosphate in the blood, hypomagnesemia, and hypokalemia. And this is not good. Namely, because if the amount of potassium in your blood goes down, this can lead to something called cardiac arrhythmias, which is where the rhythm of your heart is wrong. And this can lead to cardiac arrest, i.e. a heart attack. But it also can lead to failure of most of your organ systems. So, and on top of this, because the amount of ions in your blood go down, water is drawn out of cells into your blood, which, as I said earlier, leads to fluid shifts all over your body. So, I mean, I've got a bit of paper here that talks about the consequences of refeeding syndrome, and it can lead to acute heart failure, neuromuscular failure, renal failure, hepatic failure, respiratory failure, gastrointestinal failure, hematological failure, and ultimately death if it's not managed properly. The other thing that I haven't mentioned is vitamin deficiency. And if you are fasting for prolonged periods of time, the amount of thiamine in your blood, which is vitamin B1, can go down. And when you enter the fed state so quickly, the B1 is absorbed into your cells so that it can start metabolizing and go through all of these motions. And this can lead to something called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which essentially can lead to walking problems. Well, the Wernicke part can lead to walking problems, eye movement problems, and general cognition problems. But that is completely reversible if you receive intravenous vitamin B1. The problem is if it progresses to Korsakoff syndrome, that is an irreversible cognitive problem. And I mean, it's not commonly seen in people with eating disorders, but it's more commonly seen in alcoholics because they're so deficient in vitamin B1. So, this leads me on to the final point, that when you're in a hospital and you're starting to eat again, the importance is to start off small and progress back up to a normal meal plan. And this isn't only better on your general physiology, but would be better on your sort of mentality, because if you're eating too much too soon, it can be quite fearful in a way. I mean, I hope you found this useful. I certainly did, because this is going to be on my finals. But yeah, if you've got any other questions, please let me know. And thanks.